What's up? I have a sim on my screen. This is the question I want to answer with this video. Why does it matter what level the boss is? How does the attack table work? Why does weapon skill matter or not matter nowadays? Let's get into it. On the sim, the settings are no abilities will be used, no runes will be used, only auto attacks will be done. The gear the character in is for Season of Discovery, but it has no impact on the experiment. I just picked the consumes and gear so that way we'd have 100 auto attack DPS on the sim, so that way we can see how much the auto attack DPS changes as we increase the level of the thing we're hitting. Now let's see, at a level difference of 2, which is what's currently implemented in the game for bosses, but is not normal. Normally the level difference is equal to 3. We do 100 DPS if we only auto attack. Let's see, how much DPS would we do if we had the standard boss mechanic where they are considered 3 levels above us? And you're going to see that instead of having 100 DPS, changing level by 1 costs us 18 DPS, but remember, this is all built so that way it scales well. It's an 18% damage reduction to have this extra level. Now, let's add another level so we can show you this gets worse and worse. Now it's a 4 level difference. What's the DPS? Okay, so it goes down to like another almost 20%. What if it was a 5 level difference? You see how quickly this is getting tanked, and this is the reason that when you're trying to level and attacking stuff that's a higher level than you, it's a real good luck. If you were level 25 and you could hit something that's 27, you do 100 DPS. If it was instead 31, you do 12 DPS. This is a core mechanic to the game, and it's one of the reasons that Melee is doing more damage right now. Let's get into it. So remember, what we currently have is bosses are considered 2 levels above a player. Why does this matter? It's because it impacts something called the attack table. The attack table is a table based on your weapon skill and the thing that you're hitting's level and its defense skill. But mobs always have all of their weapon and defense skills maxed, so it's basically just based on level difference. Now, there's a whole bunch of different things that get affected here, but we're going to go over only the ones that affect DPS. One of the things that we're not going to cover anymore, just a little bit right here, is parry chance goes from about 6.5% to 14% for a tank if they're hitting something that's level 3 instead of level 2. So that's almost a 10% threat / DPS reduction on tank players. Nuts. Another thing is if a level difference is equal to 3, then you have a 9% hit cap. If a level difference is equal to 2, you have a 6% hit cap. So you see there's a whole bunch of different ways that you get nickeled and dimed for having a big level difference. But the big reason, the number one reason why you cannot attack crap out in the world if it's like 5 levels higher than you is the chance to have a glancing blow occur grows quickly. As you see, we only have the table out to 3 levels, but this keeps growing. And then you have the base damage penalty, and this also keeps growing rapidly, which is the reason why when we ran this sim and we went from a 2 level difference to instead a 5 or let's say a 6 level difference, you have a 88% reduction in DPS going from a 2 level difference to a 6 level difference. So 4 levels, 88% DPS. Wild. Now, back in the day, everybody played humans and orcs pretty much if they were doing DPS and they were really serious about the meta. And the reason why is you would get this damage penalty if you had weapon skill, and you'd get this one if you didn't. So a 15% penalty if you have weapon skill, and a 35% one if you don't. Now, this chance to occur is not impacted by your weapon skill. It's only impacted by the boss level. But it does also implement a buff for us in Season of Discovery. It does mean that we're going to have 33% less glances as long as they keep this mechanic in the game. Now, let's quickly go over why this difference is so stark between level 27 and 28. We can do a little thought experiment here. We'll say that we had a human warrior and a gnome. And there's a 40% chance for a glance to occur. So to keep this simple, we'll say 5 attacks. So the first 3, they won't glance. We'll say that these guys both hit for 100 every time they hit if they don't get a glance. So 3 100s, and then they're each going to get 2 glances also. The glances for the gnomes, they're going to be 65s because they have a 35% penalty. And for the humans, it's going to be 85s because they have a 15%. Then the difference between these two numbers, it's going to be this times 2, of course, when you sum all this up. So that's going to be 40. When you add everything else together, it's like 440. So it's an 11th, but we're going to say it's a 10% difference because that just keeps the math nice and clean. So right off the top, if you could attack something that's 3 levels higher than you, being a human would give you a 10% damage edge over a gnome. Now, there is actually still a damage edge over a gnome because there is still a difference in skill. So right now, the bosses, they're 2 levels above us. The human has a 5 level difference because they still have the 5 weapon skill. So let's see, what would this change here? It means that if we re-simulated this to find out what the current state is, there'd be a 10% less penalty per hit on the human. What we have drawn out here right now is if you're attacking something 3 levels above you. So we don't currently have this 10% difference. Let's re-simulate this for what we do have, though, and you'll see how much reduced the difference is nowadays compared to back then. So we used to have a 10%. Now we'll say, okay, the humans, they're going to have a 5% penalty. So instead of 85, they'll have 95. And the gnomes, instead of having a 35% penalty, they now have 5 less delta. So they're at this 10 here. So they'll have a 15%. And so they'll get 85. Great. And so now we have a difference of 20. And also the base number is larger. It's about 500. You can see over here, it's a little less. And so now this is like 4%. Great. So I think that's a cool thing for game balance. It used to be that humans were 10% better, but now humans are about 4% better. Cool. What else would this change? Well, something that is a little bit of better news for the gnome is that this hit cap difference. You see, nowadays, everybody is going to have basically the same penalty from this. So in this case, the gnome, they'll need 6% hit to be capped when something's 2 levels above them. The human, you look at the 5 value here, so it's 5.5. So there's only a 0.5% difference here. It used to be 3, where the human would get this 6 because they'd have a difference of 10, and the gnome would get this 9 because they had a difference of 15. So that's cool. We also went from a 3% difference to a 0.5% difference. That still only explains 13%. Remember, we had a 18% difference. Well, another thing that's in the game, and this has not been changed, is every point of weapon skill gives you 0.1% hit, which is why you see down here, it just keeps on counting by 0.1. There's no magical property. The magical property is when the difference is greater than 10, there's a different formula, which is why you have this weirdness up here above the 6 value. So let's see, you get 0.1 per weapon skill. So that means I get 0.5% more hit from being a human. Interesting. But it also affects your dodge and parry. So it's 0.5% hit, dodge, and parry. So a human, you get a 1.5% edge on that, and it's still 1.5. So we're getting closer, and then there are a couple other minor things. One of them is that you get about a 3% crit penalty if the difference in levels is equal to 3. And so now it's equal to 2, and so this is basically 0. It's still there. And then there's a couple other little things, but this is how you explain most of the difference from weapon skill and mob levels. And this is the reason that Blizzard went ahead and made it so that way bosses were only considered 2 levels above us. They found a clever way without changing too much about the game to change the meta. And this is the kind of stuff that I'd hope that they'd look at for balancing things like hunters.